it's in the breaking we come unbound. And it's in the giving we are found. Yeah, you could barely change.
Welcome to A Medicinal Mind, Wisdom and Wellbeing, a podcast dedicated to the telling of authentic stories and the sharing of insightful wisdom, exploring science and spirituality, medicine and Mother Nature. No topic is off limits when it comes to growing our personal understanding and supporting our collective well-being. With your host, Dr. Rob Abbott, a family medicine resident practicing spiritually focused and evolutionarily informed functional medicine, we hope to nourish your being so that you can flourish in whatever the moment has called for you to do.
And I know you tried.
In episode 26, or what I affectionately call the Thanksgiving edition of A Medicinal Mind, Wisdom and Wellbeing, I share space with one of the most creative, curious, and supportive souls in my life journey, the owner and healer behind Davidson Yoga Therapy, Samantha Leonard. In addition to her work with Davidson Yoga Therapy, Samantha is the founder and creative director of MyBackPainGuru, Learn to Teach Yoga, and has led education, professional development, and mind-body wellness programming for the Carolinas healthcare system, Davidson College, and the Sanger Heart Clinic. As part of her thriving practice with Davidson Yoga Therapy, she works with people with conditions from ulcerative colitis and ischemic stroke to anxiety and anorexia, diabetes and low back pain. As you'll hear in the podcast, the intersection of my healing journey, both professionally and personally, with that of Samantha's is beyond rational explanation. First connecting as part of an initial session of the American Viniyoga Institute's yoga teacher training, we have continued to remain close, tied geographically by the shared homes of my grandparents and Samantha in Davidson, North Carolina. In this conversation, Samantha shares some incredible insights and vulnerable wisdom as part of her own journey, exploring her spiritual self and the fascinating practice we have both come to know as yoga. Digging into questions such as, what really is yoga? And more specifically, yoga therapy. What does it mean to be a yoga teacher versus a yoga therapist? What kind of training is required? Grounding in faith, we explore some curious concepts and questions surrounding Christianity and yoga. Where exactly does Jesus fit into the practice? And can I meditate and still remain a Christian? Being left wordless on more than one occasion, this conversation is filled with nourishment and inspirational ideas that will likely leave you seeking, if you aren't already, a road of self-exploration through more purposeful contemplation and reflection. Samantha is pioneering a field of healing through yoga therapy, and I can only imagine the possibilities for greater collective wellness through the continued training and promotion of certified yoga therapists as part of integrative and multidisciplinary care teams. I am so fortunate to have met Samantha and all of the engaging souls with the American Viniyoga Institute, including our teacher, Gary Krafsow. I am blessed to offer, through this engaging conversation, at least a small sampling of some of the most enlightening teachings I have received as part of my time with Gary and our nurturing yoga family. And with that, let's breathe into the show. Well, Samantha, thank you so much for joining me today for a podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
I think we have to be really honest at the beginning and tell people, this is not going to be an ordinary podcast, and you are not an ordinary person in my life, and would love for you to share a little bit about who you are, and we can certainly dig into why this isn't going to be the most ordinary of podcasts.
It's never ordinary. All right. Well, shoot. What's your first question? I'd love to talk.
Yeah. So I think we met, goodness, it feels like it was 10 years ago, but perhaps it was more like just 4. But sort of our paths crossed in a yoga training. And I was just a little naive young buck thinking this was going to be something that would be really helpful for me, and still trying to navigate medical school. And you were this wise, amazing, just had practiced for what seemed like, an eternity, and brought so much sort of practical wisdom to this practice, and openness as well. And we bonded immediately over kind of a shared geographic home. Found out you were living in Davidson, which was my second home. My grandparents, my parents, just such a nourishing place. So we immediately bonded and kind of have grown from there. And so, would love for you to kind of share a little bit about how did you even end up at that training for our paths to cross in the first place?
Oh my. That's a big question, actually. You weren't expecting a big question to have a big answer. I'll have to go back in time just a little bit, because I think what you're asking me is, how did I get into yoga, and how did I have the experiences that I've had before you met me, and what's the trajectory? I will answer that in a story, but bear with me, it'll have some elements that will make sense in further questions. I grew up in a very troubled household, and my father was he was an excellent human being. He was also an excellent alcoholic, and as you can imagine, growing up in an alcoholic household, there were some times where I was in jeopardy. I had some traumatic experiences, which I won't name today, but they left their scars on me. And growing up in that household, and eventually watching that man drink himself to death, I developed the question, why? I remember at times when I was caring for him up until he died, and I remember there were times, it was the middle of winter, I would sit outside, and I'd sit in the snow until my buns were frozen, and I would just cry. And at that time, I didn't have a relationship with God, but that was the only thing I could turn to. God was the only thing I could turn to. And I just remember crying until I was frozen. Why? Why is this suffering necessary? And if it is necessary, how can I make meaning out of it? Because it's really the only way I could think of to transcend it, So I was young when I started having these questions.
How old were you when this was coming up?
Dude, I was like 14 years old. I was really, at 9, I was traumatized and just really flying around, going from friendship to friendship and just seeking. And at 14, I picked up a book on, it's Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey. And I was reading all kinds of philosophy at that age. And I was not a normal, teenager. I would talk Joseph Campbell and Buddhism with friends around a fire while the other people were, drinking beer and making out. So
that sounds about right.
So, I realized, at the time when he was really, really going south, that I was living my life to answer that question. That's what my life's purpose was, to answer that question. But, I was still traumatized. I was still running around from house to house, apartment to apartment, job to job, city to city. Just running. And it took me a long, long time to take those yogic practices, because I've been reading those books as well, and then the philosophy, and really find a home for it inside my heart, So the question why can really explain how I ended up on this path and where I am today. I started taking yoga classes. I had been doing yoga on my own with this book, the Shivananda Companion to Yoga. A lot of weird, esoteric, strange postures, strange breathing practices, candle gazing, without a guide, without a teacher. But I finally took a class after I'd had my first child, and I was only going once a week, and I was changing. And I wanted to know why.
Very curious.
And I started my first teacher training. I got a 45 hour, and then I got a 200 hour, and then I got 2 more 200 hours. And then I joined, and I got a 500 hour. And then I joined Gary Kraftsau's program, and that's where I met you. So I had already been doing, I wasn't interested in teaching classes. I really wanted to work one-on-one with people because I had experienced the therapeutic power of yoga, and I wasn't into the choreographed, scene. I really wanted to get into the science of why, and Gary has taught me that. And my other teacher, Koveri Weber from Subtle Yoga. It's been quite a journey, and I'm just so grateful because I'm answering that question. The deeper I go, the question is being answered, and now I'm able to help other folks answer that question.
That, what you just said right there, being able to help other people answer that question. You can't answer it for them, but you can provide a space, hold a space, create a vision for them to discover that.
Yes.
And I think that's, to me, that's the ultimate when it comes to anyone in a healing profession, is being able to help people answer that question of what is my intention, what is my purpose. And I think, at least for us, where we bond is helping people create a relationship with God or something greater, and knowing that the fulfillment that can come from that is just, it's endless. There's no ceiling to that relationship and that growth. So I loved how you just ended with that. And I hope people listening, no matter what sort of profession, we're sort of talking more specifically and as clinicians and kind of a health background, but you can hold that kind of space, regardless of what your job title might be. And I thank you for sharing just very sort of deep, vulnerable pieces of your story and getting to that point. And I guess I still remember back in 2013 when I was at that training with Gary Kraftsau, and I won't get into the details of how I ended up there, but sort of had the same curiosity. And I remember walking in and looking around and seeing, I didn't exactly fit in with the group that was taking this on paper.
Oh, sure you did.
I was, this young male in a room of predominantly older, middle-aged, different age females, and with a medical background. But you guys just were so open and gracious, and I learned more from just being with you guys, I feel like, than even this amazing teaching from Gary. It was such a wonderful experience. And we have continued to be able to connect because of our sort of shared geographic and family ties, and been able to push each other towards bigger and bigger heights. And I really wanted to sort of get in today. You've already alluded to some of these ideas of, you started with yoga and maybe some esoteric practices, and it kind of grew and got really curious to take some trainings. But perhaps we can get really, really granular. And I want to ask you, well, what really is yoga, or as you kind of called it, the science of yoga?
Yeah, granular. I like that word. So, a lot of folks define yoga as the union of mind, body, and spirit. And, that's a strange thing to think about. How does that work? How does that happen? I like to refer back to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. It's a book that is filled with tools, guidance for someone who wants to realize who they truly are. They realize their true nature. And the philosophy is that you are love. You are love, essentially. And that there is a way for you, just as you are, exactly where you are, to move toward that. And it's not just physical practices. It's not just we're doing, dancer pose or, pigeon pose. It's not that. That's just one of the tools, one of the ways we lean in the direction of going inward and realizing who we are. It's developing a relationship with yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the biggest point I'd like to focus on, is that concept of, I think, and Gary hit this, would just hit over our, hit our heads with this concept is yoga is not asana, or asana is not yoga. It's just one component of it. And when we talk about asana, it's this physical practice, which I feel is, there's so many benefits from that. And oftentimes that's people's gateway into this deeper practice, but was curious to see.
As it should be.
Yeah, exactly.
As it should be. I mean, we all have aches and pains, and we need to take care of those if we're going to do the work, the inner work. And you might not even want to do the inner work, but taking care of those aches and pains and building your stamina, building your energy is naturally going to lead you in that direction anyway. And you take it as far as you want to take it.
Yeah. So I was, curious if you wanted to break down in terms of your understanding, what are some of the fundamental components of, someone's yoga practice, recognizing we both share and have been taught this truly individualized experience. Like you said, it's someone's, personal self-exploration, and they can make it into whatever they want. But what do you see as some of the fundamental practices and essentials of this sort of science of yoga?
Yeah, that's a real easy question to answer. We do start with the body. There's no reason not to. It's the most dense. It's what we think we are. And because this is a practice because yoga is a journey of increasing self-awareness, self-acceptance, self-realization, you start with the body, and the practices of the body are done in a way that help you, reveal more of you, to get more subtle. So the practices of the body actually prepare you to breathe. They prepare the 4 parts of the breath. And when you have that kind of a mastery over the 4 parts of the breath, you're able to influence your physiology. You're able to influence the way you feel, depression and anxiety, for instance. You're able to give yourself energy when you need it and go to sleep if you need to. There's lots of application for those breathing practices in medicine. And these are very scientific practices. They're very specific. They're adapted to the individual. So it is like, a little prescription. It can be. So the practices of the breath, when you're able to really balance, let's just say the sympathetic and parasympathetic activation.
Yeah.
When you're able to find that balance, you're able to be more resilient in your life. So that's very useful. But you're also able to experience what I think very few of us experience these days, and that is a still mind. And I'll tell you, and this is all really from, I'm sort of plagiarizing from Gary Kraft's out here, but a still mind.
We just have to put it out there.
Yeah, he's worth plagiarizing. A still mind, when you're in that still space, you're able to hear the prayer that's written on your heart, or you're able to understand the question that your life is meant to live, or your life is meant to answer.
Yeah.
That's the way I like to put it. So
that's so beautiful. And
yeah,
it really is so true. I mean, I think about this process as you outlined, sort of starting with the body and being able to enter in to this relationship, with your breath. We walk around so much not realizing that we're breathing, or that we have this capacity to actually, manipulate our breath. And there's so many people, there's a lot of individuals out there who have actually taken some of these practices and try to strip them away from kind of the yoga for that fear of just using the term and getting people like, oh, well, that if it's called yogic breathing or pranayama, then it can't do anything for me. And I've really kind of extracted out the practice and applied it to very specific medical conditions, asthma and some of these COPD and lung conditions and other conditions. And it's interesting when you strip away perhaps some of these charged words, people are able to accept the practices. Do I think that's right or wrong? I mean, I think it's a little, it's interesting, but people are recognizing what they have to do to allow people to begin. So yeah, please.
So I'd like to actually address one of the things you brought up. People think it's not for them because it's called yoga. Now, I want to tell you something. In my office, I don't ask anyone to take off their shoes. I have no Om symbols in my office. There's nothing indicating, it looks like a little clinical office, because that's not the culture of the people that I am working with.
Yes.
And yoga is adaptable 100,000% to the actual person. So it's not about, worshiping the blue guy with the flute, and the snakes on his head. It's about you finding the prayer that's written on your heart. So it adapts to your culture as well. So that's that yoga is a religion. I fight all the time to educate people that that's not the case.
Yeah.
Yoga is your religion.
Yes. yoga is your religion, and your religion is your religion. Your Christian faith is your religion. Your Buddhist faith is your it is your practice. And I mean, we share a belief system. We're both sort of very strong Christian faith, and we've grown up in a culture where we see I'm living in a culture that's predominantly Christian, and you start to bring in these practices of meditation with the connotation that it's sort of this Eastern practice, and people oftentimes are very less accepting just because of the words. And you have done some tremendous work in being able to make these practices, making yoga accessible, and like you said, giving people a framework of understanding. This isn't contrary to my belief system. This doesn't mean I can't believe in Jesus, or I can't believe in whoever, the blue guy with snakes on his head. And I would love for you to perhaps delve into this question about where does yoga fit into?
I can't wait. Where does Jesus fit into yoga, right?
Where does Jesus fit in?
Okay. I have such a great analogy. I've been just dying in my chair over here to bring it up. And I hope I do it justice, because I do this as an infographic when I'm lecturing in a yoga teacher training, or in public. I do a lot of public presentations. So here's my infographic. So picture a mountain, and picture a mountain. Now, at the top of the mountain we can call it God, okay? At the top of the mountain is God, and we want to climb that mountain, and we want to realize ourselves. We want to realize we be in relationship with God, in full relationship. Or, for those of us out there who are, non-believers, or like to think about it in more scientific terms, let's call it code, okay? Yeah. You want to download the code. So I talk in all of these terms so I can reach different people. It's important that they understand they are not excluded. So now you have the image of the mountain in your head, and I want you to envision now maybe 5 guys, and I say guys, I mean people, 5 people in history that we can name. Most of us can probably name 5, but some of us maybe a few more, some of us maybe a few less. 5 or 6 guys in history who have been up the mountain and realized that full relationship. Okay, self-realization, relationship with God, whatever it is, immersion, code. Now, one guy that was born with wings. And so he was able just to fly up the mountain and met God, or got the code, or self-realization. And he flew back down to humanity, and he says, hey, I met God. I know that that's there. And they say, how did you do it? How did you do it? And he says, well, I've got wings, don't you? I flew up. And then there's a lot of people out there now who feel like they can never do it because they weren't born with wings. And there's another man, or a person in history, let's say. I'm sorry, I keep referring to the male gender. I certainly don't mean to. There's my cultural DNA showing its face. So there's another person who, doesn't have wings and just decides to trek up the mountain. And it's a long, hard trek, but this person is very, very eager. And this person works every day, nonstop at getting up that mountain. And this person does it with all of their heart. And they go over a river, and this person camps out for a while, and then comes out of the campsite, and then hikes up a crevasse, and then, meets a special wizard that gives him a walking stick or something like that, and then continues up the mountain, and then eventually, when he's very, very old, meets God, gets the code, self-realization, and then comes back down the mountain, and everyone says, how did you do it? And he says, well, I walked this trail, and I crossed this path, and I did this stream, and I camped out for 40 days and 40 nights, and then I went a little farther up, and then it happened. And then they all say, well, that's what we need to do. So they write it all down, and they all start doing that. And, you see where I'm going with this. Yes. And then let's say there's another person that's born, and these are all, I got to refine these analogies, but another person that's born with extremely long arms and legs. And this person takes the most dangerous route up the mountain, and it's this straight up rock climb. And certain death at every foothold, every handhold, but the passion in this heart, in that person's heart, has him going straight up the mountain, and again, self-realization, download the code at one with God, comes back down. You get the picture. But the point is that I'm trying to make here is that there are many, many paths up the mountain and many things to call what's at the top of the mountain. And it's an extremely personal, individual journey. And this is what draws me so much to yoga, because I have always felt like I'm not like anybody else. Yeah. When you talked about coming into the teacher training and not feeling like you fit in, I don't fit in. I'm mouthy. I'm my personality is pretty big, and I don't really try to hold it back. But what I was seeing around me, even as a young child, I just didn't feel like it fit me. I respected it, I wanted it, but I wasn't invited in because it wasn't my personal journey. So this is what yoga does for me. Yoga therapy in particular, and it's from the Yoga Sutras again. These are tools, it's advice, it's a little bit of a roadmap, but not exact, to get you up your own individual mountain. And you do it in the way that you do it. You don't have to do this type of posture. You don't have to stand in headstand for 30 minutes a day. You don't have to be a vegetarian. You don't have to burn incense and wear bells on your fingers. You don't you don't have to do any of that. You can do it in your farmhouse. You can do it in your office. You can do it in your sleep. It's just accessible by everyone anywhere they can possibly be. And I hope that wasn't too long of a story.
No, it was beautiful and so poetic. I mean, I always say on this podcast, I just love the imagery and the metaphors. I sort of live in that world.
I did too.
And so love that description of the mountain and these different paths, these sort of different ways that you can cultivate a relationship and get to the code, get to God, and really experience that oneness with that sort of universal being, that God. And I loved, I think we want to kind of shift our direction. You provided kind of a good segue into, you use the term yoga therapy.
Yes.
And I think it's probably important for us to, or for you to help us sort of guide and navigate the divide between, what is this sort of science of yoga and this yoga practice, and what is yoga therapy in terms of a profession, or as a clinician having done some training. Really, what is the difference? Because to me, it sounds like, I could probably tell people, that those two postures might be really helpful for your back pain, but something tells me that that's not really what yoga therapy is.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I have difficulty defining it even today. But so where I usually start is training. A yoga teacher generally will have, they can be a teacher at 250 hours of training, which is roughly a month of training. And basically in that training, they can learn how to say, put your arm here and put your foot here and look like this pose.
Yes. Okay.
So at that level of training, it's about the pose. It's not about the person. Now, so then the next level of training you can get is a 500 hour. And then generally you're getting more into some deeper philosophical application of yoga, breathing. But yoga therapy is way, way, way more education. And you have to understand that we're working on many different levels at once. So you can have tight hamstrings, and you can have a fatty liver, and you can have a bad attitude, and you can have a tumultuous relationship with God. And guess what? I can create a practice that's meaningful to you to address all four of those things at once. So there are protocols, general protocols, which I will take and I'll adapt to the individual that comes in. So I can give you another story if we have time.
Go into the story. We most certainly do.
Wonderful. This is a great story. So one of my clients, his name is Jeffrey, he came to me 3 years ago, and he had a stroke, and he was really unable to control one side of his body, and the other side of his body, he had a lot of pain. And he used the analogy, it feels like someone took a cheese grater to my skin and then a blowtorch and then poured lemon juice on it. So he was in a lot of pain and really out of control, and he was incredibly depressed. he was not able to make sense of who he was before the stroke and who he had become in his mind after the stroke. So you can imagine that we didn't really do a lot of asana or postures because it stressed him out too much to try to control the one side and deal with the pain. So we didn't enter through the window of the body. And the breath, it was very hard for him to control his breath because he didn't have the ability to close the glottis or valve at the glottis. So what we did instead was we connected him with his source of joy, and his source of joy was traveling. He was a pilot. He flew really fascinating cargo all over the world. He flew, Arabian horses into and out of Dubai, and he told me this story about how they have to treat the horses, and it's a fascinating story. I'll probably put it on my website.
Like, a job that so many people are when they were like growing up, like, I want to be a firefighter. No, I want to fly Arabian horses.
He flew a whale once. He was just so fascinating. So talking about his past travels made him feel some joy. And then I would play a little bit of music, a little, and sometimes he'd say, that sounds like the music I used to listen to when I was flying into and out of, the Middle East. And so we'd have the music going, and that would give him more joy. And then I also brought in a mortar and pestle and some aromatic herbs and seeds. And I had him grinding, the seeds in with one hand and then the other hand. So there was a little bit of cross brain, stuff going on. And then the coolest thing was how we started to affect the muscles of his spine. So you can imagine he slumped a little bit to one side, and it was difficult for him and painful for him to stay engaged, for his whole spine to be upright all the time. So eventually he would, we'd still be talking and he would be kind of slumping over, and I would say, put your nose down in that and smell it. Like, draw your nose up toward the ceiling and smell it all the way up. If you can imagine, he's, straightening his spine as he's smelling. Well, this was the way in. So instead of going in through the body, we went through ideation, and then channeled that through the breath, and that affected the physiology or the anatomy. And it wasn't everything he was doing, obviously. I don't think just smelling herbs is going to create more stability in someone's spine, but it was a way in. And it gave him that access to who he was and made him feel stronger. And he was able to get a little bit of what we call prana shakti. It's this feeling of life force, this feeling of verve, so that you can live out your life's purpose. He really, really got a lot of that. And he's back training pilots. He is training pilots,
no
flying
joke.
all over the world. Listen, he just went to, is it Kilimanjaro? I have a picture of him at the base camp of Kilimanjaro, and he did that all on his own. And he went parahawking, which is parasailing and feeding hawks. And he's back to doing what he loves.
Parahawk.
I know. And it's such a beautiful story. He just wrote a book about his life, and hopefully it's coming out soon. He has a little thing in there on yoga therapy. It's just, when someone has something to live for, when they have meaning in their lives, suddenly you have a different perspective on, your problems and your health and what you can do and where you can take it. It's just amazing. So we go in, there are different doorways into the human condition. Did that answer your question? Was that a good reflection?
So beautiful. Again, wow, I really am almost speechless, just soaking in.
I want to cry every day.
It's really, I can imagine, yes, it's easy for me to kind of look into having been in your office and seeing that space, but just seeing that experience of renewed joy and that practice, visualizing, breathing in these aromatic herbs, and through that kind of strengthening those, like you said, the muscles of the spine, and really rejuvenating this human, this soul, to be able to reconnect with why he was still here and not be consumed with the ruminative thoughts of, why did this happen to me? What, I can't do this or this anymore. And it's so creative. Goodness,
Yeah.
I couldn't talk to anybody else, and I think, around the world, who would be like, the first thing they would, go to is, oh, well, you can't really do this, so how about we, let's get you grinding some herbs. And that's just so creative. And what you gave him was new life. And I mean, there's no drug on the planet that's going to do anything close to what you just did. And I think, it's really what brought me curiously to want to be a part of this training. And I was only able to kind of really get my feet wet with an initial session with Gary and meeting you, because I had to kind of go back to this medical school thing that I had signed up for. But I have just stayed with the practice and stayed connected with you all. And it just planted so many seeds to show me what really can be done when you actually look at things beyond just the physical, or even, even some of the basic sort of mental capacities. When you look far beyond that, you can really change someone's life, and on paper have done nothing for them, kind of quote unquote medically and
clinically.
It just, to me, it gives me so much hope that there's people out there like you, having met other yoga therapists, having met other people who have gone through this process, holding these types of spaces, because you were exactly the right person that he needed at that moment. I truly, truly believe that. You were placed in his life to be able to open those doorways. And I think we have to, just more broadly as a field of healing, we need to let go of our egos of, I have to have the answer, or I will be the right person for everyone, because realistically, we won't. And I think, Gary always said it best, and I've said this numerous times in the in podcasts, is, everything is not right for someone, but something is right for everyone. So I even changed it to say someone is right for somebody. So you're going to find somebody to work with. And if it's not, if you work with somebody, medical doctor, or even a yoga therapist the first time, and it's not the right fit, don't get down on yourself, because it is a process. It is a practice. Yeah. And that was probably too much of a ramble, but
no. I actually, let me take a couple of points out of there. Is I refer people out all the time if it's not the right fit. When I interview someone to receive my services as well as they interview me. So there's a free 30-minute consultation where we exchange a lot of information, and I do refer out if someone's looking purely for, trouble with an adductor tendon injury that they sustained, 12 years ago, and it's just been bothering them ever since. I'm gonna send them to somebody uptown. Yeah. I'm gonna send them to a physical therapist who also does massage and cupping and things, because they're not really looking for what I have to offer. I get that feeling right away. And another thing is, we do have to get out of our egos, and we do have to really get rid of the idea that there is an answer for everything. So a lot of what I do for my clients, I do before I ever meet the client for the session. I spend a lot of time, and this is, again, it's a Garyism, emptying myself so that I can sit and be present with them. And I'm not scared. I'm not scared if I don't have an answer. I just ask more questions, or I observe from a different perspective, and I just kind of let it. It's a relationship that you're building, and it's an organism that needs to be fed, and it's fed with your attention, your presence, I should say. So I didn't come up with that. Like, it wasn't my creativity that got us to that point where we were doing aromatic herbs and making tea and listening to music. I was taking cues from him. I was just being present with him. So, my yoga practice is everything. It's everything for me and for my clients. So I have a lot of responsibility to just maintain that.
I remember this now, getting that description from Gary, and emptying yourself so that you can be filled as a vessel, as you said, to be, and being fully present with your patient, your client, whoever is there in front of you. And I think, and this is just me kind of speculating in the abstract, but, much of what we're facing now in the healthcare profession is significant burnout and sort of disillusionment with work. And it's completely multifactorial. You can find any, number of things that are contributing. And I was just at a conference in DC where I had tons of people professionally, different institutions, talking about, what were some of the major inputs and what they were doing. But I bring this back to really seeing that what I think is causing the most distress for clinicians is when they realize, either consciously or kind of subconsciously, that they cannot be fully present with their patient because they haven't had the ability to fully empty themselves. What's one really obvious
we
thing?
We don't value that in our culture.
Yes.
That's not. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. So basically, there's a couple just obvious examples. One is, if you're seeing patient to patient to patient in an outpatient clinic, and you have 30 seconds, 1 minute in between seeing patients, you really almost have no time to fully empty yourself, or else you better be really, really deliberate with a practice to be able to do that. And so this sort of burden of the number of patients people are being asked to see, there's no gap in between there to be able to empty yourself. And then secondarily, I think we're starting to realize we have to build these community networks within, some of the most successful groups cultivating resiliency that were pointed out to me at this conference were bringing in, resident physicians, other physicians in the institution across disciplines, and allowing them just to share stories. And through that, they were emptying pieces of burden, suffering that they had endured. And one of my greatest mentors, Jonathan Bartels at UVA, I've had him on the podcast. He is so engaged in understanding of this process and ritual. He, every Friday, as part of the palliative care service, with his fellow clinicians and whoever else is around, residents, students, have sort of a ceremony, a ritual, where they're able to kind of share a story of suffering engagement, either personally or with the patient, and there's a flame, and it's sort of this like burning, letting it go. And what it is emptying them, being able to empty themselves so they can then go be fully present with those. And last point of this before I just bore people is, is this concept of, I can't really pay attention to the news because I have found that it makes it nearly impossible for me to empty myself, to be fully present with the people that I'm seeing in the clinic. Yes, I want to care about, and I do care about through a loving kindness practice, all humanity, all organisms. But if by having that, radio on or that news on, it is, without even me knowing it, taking me away and filling me up with things that I don't really want to have, so that I can't be fully present, like you had said, with my patient, with my client. And I think a lot of us feel guilty about, well, I'm not engaged, I should care, I should be doing this. And it's like, yes, but you know what? There's someone right next to you that you might not even be able to see if your eyes are looking somewhere else. And so there's all of those things that I feel like are taking us away, bringing this back again to that ability to empty ourselves and be fully present. And I would love to get, you already provided a lot of your insight on this, but maybe even get very practical on what you do as your practice, or how are you able to empty yourself to be fully present with your patients and clients?
Yeah, well, I have a daily practice, honestly, at this point, mostly it's a breathing practice, and I have a prayer practice that I do. And most days I do a physical practice. Like I said, the physical practice leads to the breathing, and the breathing leads to the prayer. But then I also have these daily affirmations that I start with, and I start with them before I see each client, and they basically remind me that I'm not there to fix anyone. It's not my job to fix anything. What my job is to provide a space that allows the person to really connect with who they are. And the fixing all comes from within then. It's a co-creative process. So there is no power differential between me and the other person. I don't put on a lab coat. It's just relationship. So it's these constant reminders, a daily reminder, a reminder before every client. And I'm committed to doing this. It's important.
It's so wonderful to hear. It's so pure and so authentic, that practice. And it's really, there's nothing sexy about it. There's nothing like super, like, people might have been saying, oh, she probably like meditates for 3 hours a day, but it's just.
Oh, I can. I can. That might be the protocol that day. I don't know.
But just being authentic to those moments. And I've really tried to carry that and in growing our relationship, be able to share in those practices and see, like, when one of us is not doing as well or having struggles, like being able to be present with that and realizing we need that self-care practice. We need the personal practice to engage in it. And I want to, be sure to honor your time, and had one sort of big question still I kind of wanted to get into was this idea. So you're doing this amazing yoga therapy now, holding the space, working one-on-one with people. People aren't going to find you leading a class of 40 people, all doing downward facing dog. So I think, but that wasn't where you started. And you've worked with a lot of different people and really opened your eyes. Like you said, how can I make this practice accessible to anyone? And I would love to get your thoughts on how do we make this, and we can call it yoga, this practice, cultivating a relationship with something greater than yourself. How do we make this part of a greater social movement? Because I feel like, in the 60s, 70s, when some of, quote unquote gurus came from the East and brought some of these practices, there was kind of this initial movement. And now I feel like we're in a new phase. But how do we make and push this movement forward to see and show people, hey, you can take these practices, you can engage in a practice of yoga and cultivate a greater relationship that's ultimately probably going to lead you to greater joy? So I can't hear you anymore. Do you still have your mic?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. So I didn't
I'm
hear
so
any
sorry.
of that answer. I don't know if it was
Okay.
recording on your end, but I couldn't hear it. So
No, I accidentally pushed a button. I think my first responsibility, I'll just take it from my own perspective, is to show people in the smallest way possible, the most accessible way. So just basic gestures and breath work and intention. In fact, I'm recording something today like that, that they can access a great wealth of power inside of them. And I'm going to call this power because it is power. The power of inner peace and the power of their own inner wisdom. And it's not hard to get to. It really isn't hard to get to. And once you have that, once they have that, or anyone has that, then they're comforted. Then they feel safer, right? I don't think anyone, unless they're already feeling really safe inside, is going to jump on a social change bandwagon because they've got their own stuff to work out.
yes.
So help people in small ways to work in small ways, and then increasingly larger ways to work out their stuff. And here is a trick. I think that if you look at social ecology model, we live in a nested system. I don't live in a vacuum. If I do something like that for myself, it is going to have a ripple out effect into my immediate community, my larger community, my, and on and on. So that does happen. And the more we're able to access that inner guru, that inner knowing, that deep sense of knowing, the safer will be to go out and make those changes outright. But they're happening anyway, was my point. They're happening anyway. Just by doing a self-care practice, you're caring for what God has given you. And that's your first responsibility.
Yes.
Then you can care for other people. So it does happen automatically, but we have to take care of ourselves first. Does that answer your question?
It does. And it's completely in alignment with my really close friend, Thomas Ball, who's now a first-year resident like myself in psychiatry. And we had such a close relationship. He was so dedicated to his practice. And he was probably the really first person to get me to realize, before you feel like you need to go change the world, like you just practicing is exactly what is needed of you. And that is all. Just, me, my engaged in my own practice, that's what the world truly needs. And not losing sight of getting caught up in these other things, or being drawn to need to teach a class, or provide the space for other people. It's really start with your practice. And I mean, as I've continued to grow in my faith and this practice, I see it's easy to look at the sort of evangelical Christian and see them shouting from the rooftops, I'm, a Christian and you should believe in this and this. And I've always been a little wary of that kind of mentality. But I realize now that as I've grown my practice and grown more comfortable with my values and see what is my process to cultivate a relationship, I've kind of lost the fear of needing to say, hey, I'm a Christian, if that's what we even call this. Like, I have a relationship with God. I meditate. I practice the science of yoga, and that's who I am. And you can say I'm not a Christian if I do that, or you can say I'm not a yogi because I don't do whatever. You can have other people can have their judgment. It takes nothing away from me. And holding that space, practicing, and just saying that, and not being afraid. I think that is ultimately what's going to show people and move this sort of greater movement forward. It sounds like that's kind of what you were getting at.
That's an aspect of it. Absolutely. And to that point, I think you were just talking about those people after the guys came down off the mountain and said, this is the way I did it. Now they're out saying, this is the way you have to do it too.
The only way.
And I think that really what everyone's crying out for is to understand that they're not alone in their journeys. And, I just wish we could develop more respect for each other's journeys and realize that, because I'm certainly, and this is important to me because I am not your average bear. You
are not.
I require that someone has a really open mind because of just my past, my future, how I am. And I like for everyone to have that kind of respect from me. So
I think the more open we become as society, as a humanity, to, like you said, these different paths, these different journeys, and realize we can support each other, whether we understand all of the exits off of that journey, all the nooks and crannies and the crevasse of your journey, whether we understand that or not, we can support you and honor that. And and
this is why I love you so much, Rob, because I think that you have that spirit. You've always had that spirit. You've always had that soul, and that's why we connected more than anything else.
You are so kind.
You are. Well, you're an amazing guy. You're not your average bear either. So it's very special.
Well, thank you. Well, I would love to, I guess, in closing now.
I'm all out of stories. I don't have any more stories for you.
Of course you do. You just, your brain's probably, off in Wonderland. But we would love for you to share with folks. We've kind of alluded to and talked about, some of our connections and mentioned, Davidson and North Carolina, but would allow people who maybe, were really curious and sparked by this conversation. Perhaps a seed was planted, who want that to be watered even more. How can they sort of connect with you, follow you, or just curiously want to learn more about yoga therapy? How can they do that?
Well, I have a very informative website. It's www.davidsonyogatherapy.com. And I do free 30-minute consultations to talk and answer any questions and sort of feel out if this is right for you, if this is right for me. And I can do those over Skype. I can do those in person. But I am in Davidson, North Carolina. And I would also suggest, go to AmericanViniyogaInstitute.com because, he's the master. He really is. The training is quite extensive. It takes a very long time. It's very expensive too. But if you're interested in doing something like this and you're a medical professional, he's really the one to go to. I
would second that time and time again, that it's certainly an investment, but it would be an investment in yourself. And if anything, who knows what the future will hold for me. I've been able to, accept that, I don't need to be the yoga therapy practitioner because I have people like you that I can collaborate and work with. And there's so many wonderful people who I can work with and through my profession and collaboration to do that. But if you are at all interested, I cannot say enough how, attending a workshop or going to one of these sessions will just open your eyes. And if anything, that's really what I think we need. So anyone else, students, medical folks, please just check out, like Sam Samantha was saying, the American Viniyoga Institute and Gary Craftshow. And it's once again not saying that, look, this is not the only way, but perhaps this practice might be more in alignment. And if you check it out and you say, no, that's not for me, great. It's okay. But really encourage you to check it out. So
yeah, there's a whole lot of research. There's so much research behind what he's doing. It's really, for the medically minded, it's very scientific. It's I think the best reputation in that you can find in this country.
Yeah,
and possibly the world.
And just to reiterate again, it's not medical yoga. That's just not what it is.
Well, medical yoga is actually a TM phrase. Somebody has that name, and it's just to say that they work with people that have medical conditions. But this is if you want to go through the entire thing, it's yoga therapy. So you will be working with medical conditions. Yeah. Okay, that's it.
Great. Thank you again so much for sharing this time. You already admitted that you don't have any more stories. I mean, usually I leave this space here at the end for any final reflection. So perhaps if you have any final words or one sentence or whatever you have left in that spirit of you to leave with the audience, I give you this space now.
I have something, and I just like to leave with a moment of silence. Thank you so much, Rob.
You're so welcome. And I will have to get down to North Carolina to see you soon.
You better.
All right. Have a good one.
Take care.
Thank you for your presence and willingness to receive a new narrative, a passionate perspective, and perhaps a deeper sense of connection with our collective purpose. Please share this podcast with any and all that you believe will benefit from its intention to relieve one's doing and engage one's being. Please share your comments about the conversation on our podcast page and leave a review in iTunes so that the voices in this space can spread to all ears ready to receive it. Music credit goes to Dillingham for their song Vessel. Remain open, stay curious, and forever be love.
You walked on fire, and I know you tried.